In 1943, the skies over Europe belonged to the Luftwaffe. From the deserts of North Africa to the grey clouds over France, German fighters still ruled the air. Their Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s danced through the sky with lethal grace, fast, agile, and proven killers. The Americans were new to this war in the air, their pilots green, their tactics still untested. And then came a plane that looked like no other, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. To the German pilots, it was almost comical. The Thunderbolt was enormous, the largest single-engine fighter of the war. Weighing nearly 8 tons fully loaded, it was closer to a small bomber than a nimble fighter. They called it the milk bottle, or the jug, not out of respect but mockery. Yet behind that bulky frame lay something different, something the Germans didn't yet understand. At the heart of the P-47 was its soul, the Pratt Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, an 18-cylinder radial engine capable of over 2,000 horsepower. It was a masterpiece of American engineering, rugged, reliable, and able to absorb punishment no inline engine could survive. This engine gave the Thunderbolt what few fighters possessed: the ability to climb high, dive fast, and take damage that would shred a Messerschmitt. It also gave it something more subtle: endurance. The P-47 could stay aloft for hours, escorting bombers deep into enemy territory, a role that would later define it. But in early 1943, that mission was still far away. At first, the Thunderbolt's pilots struggled to understand their aircraft. It was heavy, sluggish in turns, slow to climb. When pitted against the nimble German fighters, it often lost, especially at lower altitudes. Many American pilots returning from those first encounters carried a quiet doubt: could this ungainly monster ever be a match for the Luftwaffe's elite? German intelligence and fighter command were equally dismissive. Reports described the new American plane as too large for combat, too slow to maneuver, and vulnerable to concentrated attacks. In Luftwaffe ready rooms from France to Holland, pilots shared laughter over reconnaissance photos of this so-called Thunderbolt. They saw a flying barrel, a behemoth that dared to claim the same sky as their sleek, high-performance machines. But war, as always, has its way of humbling certainty. The P-47 entered combat with the 56th Fighter Group, operating from English airfields in early 1943. These were young men, many barely out of training, flying in aircraft still being fine-tuned in the field. Their mission was simple, yet brutal: protect the bombers. As the U.S. 8th Air Force began its daylight raids over occupied Europe, B-17s and B-24s faced relentless German attacks. Dozens could be lost in a single mission. The P-47s, with their limited range, could only escort the bombers partway, leaving them exposed during the deadliest stretches. Those early Thunderbolt flights were brutal. Pilots fought against both the enemy and their own machine's limitations. But slowly, something began to change. The 56th's commander, Hub Zemke, was among the first to understand that the Thunderbolt's true power wasn't in turning or climbing, it was in diving and striking. The Jug could dive faster than almost any plane in the sky, faster even than the German FW-190s that once taunted them. Zemke's men learned to use that strength ruthlessly, climb high, dive in with blazing guns, and use that immense speed to escape. Every Thunderbolt carried 8 Browning .50 caliber machine guns, 4 in each wing. In raw firepower, it was unmatched. A single burst from those guns could shred a bomber, slice through a fighter, or turn a train into splinters. And when those guns spoke, When 8 streams of lead erupted from the Jug's wings, the laughter of German pilots vanished in an instant. What they had once mocked as clumsy now descended like a thunderstorm. By the summer of 1943, the tide in the air war began to tilt. Thunderbolt groups, now better trained and more confident, were claiming increasing victories. German pilots who once approached head-on now hesitated. They began to see the Jug not as a target, but as a threat. Its thick armor could take hits that would destroy most planes. Many pilots returned to base with wings torn, tails riddled, and engines burning, yet alive. For the Americans, survival meant experience. And experience turned into mastery. As missions pushed deeper into Europe, to the Ruhr, to Hamburg, to the edge of Berlin, the P-47 proved it could not only survive but dominate. In 1944, the Thunderbolt's true purpose began to unfold. With new drop tanks, its range extended dramatically, allowing it to escort bombers all the way to the heart of Germany. And no longer would American bombers fly into a gauntlet without cover. The P-47s and the newly arriving P-51 Mustangs now flew beside them, ready to challenge the Luftwaffe on every front. For the first time, German fighter command faced a war it could not control. Still, the Thunderbolt remained an enigma to those who flew it. It was heavy, yes, and when fully loaded, it drank fuel like no other. Its radial engine roared so loudly that radio chatter often vanished beneath its growl. But that same engine saved lives. Pilots told of flak bursts tearing holes in the fuselage, oil leaking over the canopy, yet the double Wasp kept running. One pilot recalled returning home with half a cylinder bank destroyed, yet still crossing the channel. The Thunderbolt, it seemed, refused to die. And so did the men who flew it. By late 1943, the Luftwaffe's elite were growing thin. Years of constant combat had worn away their best aces. Replacements were younger, less trained, and facing not only the P-47 but overwhelming numbers. Germany's once unshakable air superiority was now being contested over its own soil. And though the P-51 Mustang would soon share the skies, it was the Thunderbolt that had done the grinding work, breaking the enemy's spirit one mission at a time. In early 1944, the Allies launched Operation Argument, better known as Big Week. For 7 days, American bombers and their fighter escorts struck at Germany's aircraft factories and air defenses. The Thunderbolt flew nearly constant sorties, dive bombing, strafing, escorting. It tore through rail lines, fuel depots, and supply convoys. For the first time, the Luftwaffe was forced to defend on every front at once, and it couldn't. German pilots who had once laughed at the Jug now found themselves hunted by it. The heavy fighter they mocked had become the relentless executioner of the Reichswehr arm. By mid-1944, the P-47 was no longer just a high-altitude escort. It had evolved into something even deadlier, a fighter-bomber. With its incredible strength and firepower, it began attacking ground targets with a ferocity few aircraft could match. Armed with bombs, rockets, and machine guns, the Thunderbolt cut German supply lines to ribbons. Trains, trucks, tanks, nothing was safe from its wrath. The same 8.50 caliber guns that shredded fighters in the sky now ripped through armored columns on the ground. The Thunderbolt had become the sledgehammer of Allied air power. By late 1944, the Thunderbolt's legend was secure. Among American pilots, it inspired fierce loyalty. Among German survivors, it inspired something else, fear. Its distinctive roar became a sound soldiers on the ground would never forget. They learned that when a formation of Jugs appeared on the horizon, death followed, What began as laughter had turned to dread. By the summer of 1944, the skies over Europe had changed. What began as a desperate struggle for survival had become a storm of Allied dominance. The P-47 Thunderbolt, once ridiculed as too big, too heavy, too slow, now ruled the air. It was no longer the newcomer finding its footing. It was the seasoned warrior, scarred by countless missions, relentless in its purpose. Wherever the Allies advanced, across France, through Belgium, into the heart of Germany, the Thunderbolt was there, roaring low over the treetops, spitting fire from its wings. The Thunderbolt's transformation into a fighter-bomber was complete. It became the terror of German armor, the scourge of supply convoys, the avenging spirit that followed retreating columns down every road and rail line. From Normandy to the Ardennes, its roar echoed over Europe. Flying low and fast, the P-47 strafed with its 8.50 caliber guns and unleashed bombs and rockets that could obliterate tanks in a single strike. German soldiers learned to dive for cover at the faintest sound of its radial engine, for once it appeared, escape was almost impossible. American pilots came to call this new role J-bows, from the German Jag bomber. It was a brutal, close-quarters kind of war. Each sortie carried the smell of fuel and cordite, the sight of burning convoys below, and the knowledge that flak, unseen and unforgiving, waited in every valley. The men who flew the Thunderbolt no longer just fought for air superiority. They paved the way for armies on the ground, breaking the enemy's back one convoy at a time. In July 1944, as the Allies broke out from Normandy in Operation Cobra, the P-47 played a decisive role. Thousands of Thunderbolts descended on German positions near St. Lo, turning the landscape into a firestorm. Columns of armor were shattered. Roads became rivers of flame. Even hardened German veterans later spoke of the horror, the endless roar of engines, the scream of rockets, the hammering of guns. For the first time, the Allies wielded complete mastery of the air, and the Thunderbolt was the instrument of that dominance. No other Allied fighter could take the punishment a P-47 could. Many pilots returned home with their planes torn to pieces, wings holed by flak, fuselages scorched by fire, control cables frayed. And yet, somehow, the engines kept running. The WWII's radial design, its circular shape and air-cooling system, made it extraordinarily resilient. Even with multiple cylinders shot out, the Thunderbolt could limp home, often trailing smoke and oil across miles of sky. In those moments, the laughter of German pilots felt like a memory from another world, one swallowed by the roar of American steel. As 1944 bled into 1945, the Luftwaffe was dying. Fuel shortages grounded many squadrons. Experienced pilots were gone, replaced by boys barely out of training, flying machines they could scarcely control. Against them came a relentless tide, Mustangs, Lightnings, and Thunderbolts, thousands of them, filling the skies. The Luftwaffe tried to adapt, throwing new jets and experimental aircraft into battle, but it was too late. The Allies owned the air, and the P-47 was part of the reason why. Every train destroyed, every tank column halted, every airfield bombed. It was the Thunderbolt's work, day after day, mission after mission. The German pilots who once scoffed at the Jug now faced it with dread. They knew that when its 8.50s opened fire, there was no mercy, no escape, only the sound of thunder and the rain of metal. While Europe burned, the Thunderbolt also carried its legend to the Pacific. There, it flew long-range missions across the jungles of Burma and the islands of the Philippines, escorting bombers and striking Japanese positions. Its rugged design made it ideal for tropical conditions, where mud, heat, and lack of maintenance could kill lesser planes. Whether in the skies over France or the jungles of Asia, the Thunderbolt earned the same reputation. It was indestructible. In December 1944, as the Germans launched their last great counteroffensive, the Battle of the Bulge, the weather turned cruel. Snow, fog, and freezing winds grounded much of the Allied Air Force. For days, the ground war raged in silence above. But when the skies finally cleared, the Thunderbolts returned, and the counterattack collapsed. They hunted German armor in the forests, destroyed fuel depots, and tore bridges apart. The P-47 became the blunt weapon that crushed Germany's last hope. Its pilots called those days the most dangerous, and the most decisive, of the war. For all its might, the Thunderbolt was also a pilot's friend. It was spacious, stable, and, compared to the cramped, jittery fighters of the era, remarkably comfortable. Pilots loved its cockpit visibility and sturdy landing gear. They joked that you could land a jug in a plowed field and still walk away. Many did. In airfields across England and France, ground crews worked miracles to keep the massive fighters flying, patching bullet holes, replacing engines, refueling and rearming under rain and shellfire. Together, these men and their machines became symbols of industrial endurance, the human and mechanical power of a nation that refused to yield. By early 1945, the war in the air was no longer a contest. The Thunderbolts and their pilots owned the skies. In February, they were pounding railways leading into the Rhineland. By March, they were strafing retreating columns across the Rhine. And by April, they were flying so low over shattered German cities that their wings clipped the smoke of burning factories. Every sortie was another nail in the coffin of the Luftwaffe. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, the Thunderbolt stood among the unsung heroes of victory. It had flown over 500,000 combat sorties, dropped more than 130,000 tons of bombs, and destroyed over 86,000 enemy vehicles and 9,000 locomotives. Its pilots had claimed nearly 4,000 aerial victories in the European theater alone. Numbers that once seemed unimaginable for an aircraft so widely mocked. To the Germans who survived, the Jug became a legend of its own, not a joke, but a symbol of relentless American power. In the years that followed, as peace returned to the skies, the Thunderbolt's thunder faded into memory. New jet fighters took its place, faster, sleeker, and more modern. But the Jug's legacy endured. It served in the air forces of over 24 nations, flying into the early 1950s in Korea and Latin America. Its design influenced generations of aircraft that followed, proof that strength, resilience, and reliability can outlast fashion or elegance. For the men who flew it, the Thunderbolt remained more than a machine. It was a companion, a fortress in the air that carried them through fire and brought them home. History often remembers the sleek, the fast, the glamorous, the Spitfire, the Mustang, the Zero. But among them stands a giant, heavy and humble, whose thunder still echoes through time. The P-47 Thunderbolt was not built for beauty. It was built to endure, to fight, to take punishment, to deliver retribution with unmatched ferocity. In the end, that was its triumph. German pilots had once laughed at its size, its shape, its name. But laughter fades fast when 8.50 caliber guns speak. The Jug proved that wars are not won by elegance or pride, but by power, by endurance, and by the unbreakable will of those who refuse to fall. And so, the skies that once echoed with German laughter ended with the roar of American thunder. The P-47 Thunderbolt, the machine they mocked, became one of the most formidable weapons of the Second World War. A reminder that even in war, as in life, appearances deceive, and power often hides in the most unlikely of forms.